July 1941, Kakamigahara Airfield, Gifu Prefecture, Japan. The German fighter sat gleaming on the tarmac under the summer sun, its distinctive nose bearing the bright red circle of the rising sun rather than the black crosses of the Luftwaffe. This Messerschmitt Bf-1097 represented one of 5 examples that had arrived at Kobe port just weeks earlier, and it carried with it Germany's reputation as the master of modern aerial warfare. Japanese army pilots gathered around the aircraft with measured curiosity, their eyes studying every rivet and panel line of this European war machine that had swept Britain's finest from the skies over France. What they were about to discover would fundamentally reshape their understanding of fighter aircraft design and validate decisions that senior officers had questioned for months. The arrival of these German fighters wasn't simply about acquiring new equipment. It was about measuring Japanese aviation against the finest the West could offer, at a moment when Japan stood on the precipice of war with Britain and America. General Tomoyuki Yamashita had witnessed a demonstration flight at the Messerschmitt factory in Regensburg during a military mission to Germany earlier that year. The aircraft's performance had impressed him enough to arrange the purchase and importation of 5 Bf-1097 fighters for comprehensive testing. These weren't combat aircraft with full armament, but evaluation specimens stripped of weapons to facilitate shipping and technical examination. The Japanese military attaché in Berlin had been sending reports about German fighter technology since 1939, describing both the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and the Heinkel HE-112. Initial interest had been tempered by practical concerns. The Bf-109 carried a price tag of 260,000 marks per aircraft, a staggering sum that required careful justification. More troubling were the restrictive conditions Germany attached to any technology transfer, conditions that suggested Berlin viewed Japan more as a customer than an ally. Japanese officials had initially declined the purchase, but changing strategic circumstances altered that calculation. By 1940 and 41, with war against Western powers becoming increasingly likely, understanding how Japanese fighters compared to the most advanced German designs became a matter of strategic necessity. The Army Aviation Examination Department at Kakamigahara Airfield received the first 3 Bf-109E7s in June 1941, with 2 additional aircraft arriving shortly thereafter. This specialized unit, dedicated to examining foreign aviation technology and training pilots on advanced aircraft, immediately began systematic research. The German fighters received standard Japanese markings, bright red Hinamaris on wings and fuselage, yellow wing leading edges for visibility, white identification numbers, and a red stripe on the rudder. Number 1, the first aircraft, would become the most thoroughly tested example. What truly captured Japanese attention wasn't the airframe itself, but the engine that powered it. The Daimler-Benz DB601 liquid-cooled inverted V12-cylinder engine represented technology that Japan had been working to master through licensing agreements. Kawasaki had purchased production rights to the DB601 in 1937, and by 1940 had created their own modified version, designated the Ha-40. This engine, capable of producing 1,175 horsepower at takeoff, would eventually power the Kawasaki Ki-61 fighter. But in mid-1941, Japanese engineers still struggled with the complexities of liquid-cooled engine production, making the opportunity to examine German-built examples invaluable. The Japanese Army Aviation Examination Department approached testing with characteristic thoroughness. They would conduct comparative evaluations against 3 distinct Japanese Army fighters, each representing different design philosophies and stages of development. The Nakajima Ki-27 represented Japan's established fighter doctrine. This lightweight, highly maneuverable aircraft had entered service in 1938 and dominated the skies over China. Powered by a Nakajima Ha-1 radial engine producing 710 horsepower, the Ki-27 achieved a maximum speed of 290 miles per hour at 11,500 feet. Its empty weight of just 2,447 pounds and wing loading of only 19.8 pounds per square foot gave it extraordinary turning capability. Japanese pilots loved the Ki-27 for its docile handling characteristics and ability to outmaneuver any opponent in horizontal combat. The aircraft embodied traditional Japanese fighter philosophy, prioritizing agility and maneuverability above all other characteristics. If the Bf-109 could be defeated by Japan's older generation fighter, it would prove German design philosophy unsuited to Japanese needs. The Nakajima Ki-44 Shoki represented a radical departure from Japanese fighter tradition. This new design, still in prototype and early production stages, used a powerful Nakajima Hare 41 14-cylinder radial engine producing 1,000 horsepower, 1,260 horsepower. The Ki-44 achieved a maximum speed of 360 miles per hour, significantly faster than the Ki-27, but paid for this performance with higher wing loading and reduced maneuverability. The aircraft featured short, stubby wings, with straight leading edges and tapering trailing edges, creating a compact, aggressive appearance that Japanese pilots found unsettling. Many experienced aviators had criticized the Ki-44 during early evaluations, complaining about its poor turning ability and uncomfortably high landing speed of approximately 125 miles per hour. Senior officers questioned whether the Army should accept a fighter that abandoned the maneuverability doctrine that had served Japan so well in China. The comparison with the Bf-109 would either vindicate or condemn this controversial new fighter. The Kawasaki Ki-60 represented perhaps the most interesting comparison. This experimental heavy fighter used the same Daimler-Benz DB601 engine as the Bf-109, manufactured under license by Kawasaki as the HA-40. Design work had begun in 1940 with the goal of creating a heavily armed interceptor capable of dealing with modern Western bombers. The first prototype flew in March 1941, and by July, when comparative testing with the Bf-109 began, 2 prototypes existed for evaluation. The Ki-60 was a compact, heavily built aircraft with a 34-foot 5-inch wingspan and loaded weight of 6,603 pounds. Wing loading reached 34.8 pounds per square foot, unusually high for a Japanese fighter. Maximum speed was 348 miles per hour at 14,765 feet, with a service ceiling of 1,810 feet. The Ki-60's significance lay in its use of the same power plant as the German fighter, allowing direct comparison of how Japanese and German designers utilized identical engine technology. Messerschmitt dispatched 2 German pilots to assist with the evaluation and provide expertise on Bf-109 tactics. Wilhelm Sturr, known as Willy, was a World War I ace, an experienced test pilot who brought decades of aviation knowledge. Lieutenant Fritz Losigkeit arrived with far more recent combat credentials. This Luftwaffe pilot had fought in the Spanish Civil War, the Battle of France, and the Battle of Britain, achieving ace status with 5 confirmed victories over the Royal Air Force. Losigkeit understood modern aerial combat in ways that few men alive could claim, having survived the most intense air battles in history. His assignment to Japan reflected Germany's desire to ensure proper evaluation of their premier fighter and perhaps to learn from Japanese experiences as well. Losigkeit would remain in Japan until January 1942, advising Japanese pilots on German tactical doctrine and witnessing the evolution of Japanese fighter development. His presence created an unexpected problem that would reveal fundamental differences in how Germany and Japan conceived of air combat. The testing protocol seemed straightforward. Japanese pilots would fly mock combat engagements against the Bf-109, with performance measurements recorded under various conditions. Altitude tests, speed trials, dive tests, zoom climbs, and turning fights would map the performance envelope of each aircraft. But when Lieutenant Losigkeit climbed into the Bf-109 for the first mock battles against Japanese Army pilots flying the Ki-27 and Ki-44, his tactical approach created immediate friction. Losigkeit flew the Bf-109 using Luftwaffe energy tactics, developed through brutal combat over Europe. He would climb to altitude, use his superior speed to make diving attacks, fire a quick burst, then extend away using his speed advantage before the Japanese fighter could respond. When Japanese pilots turned to engage, Losigkeit would refuse the horizontal turning fight, instead using the Bf-109's superior diving speed and energy retention to escape, zoom climb to regain altitude, then repeat the attack. This hit-and-run approach, perfected over the bloody skies of Britain and France, maximized the Bf-109's strengths while avoiding its weakness in sustained turning combat. The Japanese testing staff found this approach deeply problematic. They had designed the evaluation to measure comparative turning performance, climb rate, acceleration, and other objective metrics. Losigkeit's refusal to engage in sustained horizontal maneuvering fights made it impossible to conduct the comparisons they considered essential. From the Japanese perspective, Losigkeit was avoiding proper combat rather than demonstrating the Bf-109's capabilities. Cultural and doctrinal differences created a fundamental disconnect. Japanese fighter doctrine, forged through years of combat in China against inferior opposition, emphasized the decisive turning fight where superior maneuverability would force an opponent into a vulnerable position for the kill. Energy tactics, the German approach of using speed and altitude to dictate engagement terms, struck Japanese observers as evasive rather than aggressive. The testing staff made a decisive intervention. They removed Losigkeit from the cockpit and replaced him with Japanese pilots who would fly the Bf-109 using Japanese tactics, accepting horizontal turning engagements that would allow direct performance comparison. The comparative testing between the Bf-109E7 and the Nakajima Ki-27 revealed exactly what Japanese observers expected. In sustained turning combat at medium altitudes, the lightweight Ki-27 could turn inside the German fighter with embarrassing ease. The Ki-27's low wing loading of 19.8 pounds per square foot versus the Bf-109's 32 pounds per square foot translated into dramatic differences in turning radius. Japanese pilots could complete full 360-degree turns in approximately 8 seconds, while the Bf-109 required significantly longer. The German fighter's narrow-track landing gear and high wing loading also created handling challenges that Japanese pilots found unacceptable. Approximately 5 to 10% of all Bf-109s produced were lost in landing accidents due to the narrow landing gear's tendency to cause ground loops. Japanese pilots, accustomed to the docile landing characteristics of radial engine fighters, found the Bf-109 demanding and unforgiving. However, the testing also revealed the Ki-27's fatal vulnerability to modern combat. The Bf-109 possessed overwhelming advantages in speed, approximately 70 miles per hour faster in level flight, diving speed, and energy retention. If the German fighter refused turning combat and instead used hit-and-run tactics, the Ki-27 had no effective counter. Japanese pilots recognized that against an opponent who understood and exploited the Bf-109's strengths, their maneuverable Ki-27 would be helpless. The comparison between the Bf-109E7 and the Nakajima Ki-44 Shoki produced the most significant results for Japanese aviation development. The Ki-44, controversial and criticized for abandoning traditional Japanese maneuverability doctrine, proved remarkably competitive with the German fighter. In speed trials, the Ki-44 matched or exceeded the Bf-109's performance, achieving 360 miles per hour versus the German fighter's approximately 350 miles per hour. Climb rate comparisons showed similar performance, with both aircraft reaching 13,000 feet in approximately 5 minutes. Most surprisingly to observers, the Ki-44 could outturn the Bf-109 despite having higher wing loading than traditional Japanese fighters. While neither aircraft matched the Ki-27's turning ability, the Ki-44's maneuverability proved adequate for combat while maintaining modern performance levels. This revelation vindicated the controversial design and silenced many critics who had questioned abandoning pure maneuverability. The Japanese Army's final report concluded that the Ki-44 represented a practical fighter aircraft capable of competing with the newest Western designs. The comparison gave institutional confidence to proceed with the Ki-44 program, despite pilot resistance to its higher landing speeds and reduced agility compared to earlier Japanese fighters. The testing between the Bf-109E7 and the Kawasaki Ki-60 provided the most technically revealing comparisons because both aircraft used the same Daimler-Benz DB601 engine. This eliminated power plant variables and allowed direct assessment of airframe design philosophy. Despite using identical engines, the two aircraft exhibited notably different characteristics. The Ki-60 matched the Bf-109's performance across most metrics, achieving comparable speeds, climb rates, and altitude capabilities. In some aspects, the Ki-60 actually demonstrated superior performance, particularly in acceleration and sustained combat operations. Japanese engineers had successfully adapted German engine technology to an airframe optimized for their requirements. However, the testing also revealed why the Ki-60 would ultimately be rejected for production. The aircraft's high wing loading of 34.8 pounds per square foot, even higher than the Bf-109, created handling characteristics that Japanese pilots found unacceptable. The Ki-60 was fast and powerful but lacked the maneuverability margin that Japanese doctrine still considered essential. More critically, the Ki-60 suffered from being too heavy for its power plant, limiting its development potential. Kawasaki's design team recognized these limitations and began work on a lighter, more refined design that would become the Ki-61, using the same Ha-40 engine in a more efficient airframe. Throughout the testing program, Japanese evaluators noted several critical factors that influenced their assessment of the Bf-109. The German fighters had arrived without armament, reducing weight and potentially improving performance compared to combat-loaded aircraft. More significantly, the DB601 engines in the test aircraft experienced mechanical problems that prevented operation at full rated power. Japanese mechanics, still learning the intricacies of liquid-cooled engine maintenance, struggled with cooling system issues and fuel injection problems that limited performance. The test results therefore represented the Bf-109 operating below its design capabilities. Had the aircraft been fully operational with experienced German ground crews, performance would likely have exceeded what Japanese pilots observed. Japanese evaluators also understood that the Bf-109E7 they were testing represented German technology from 1940, already superseded by the Bf-109F model entering Luftwaffe service in 1941. The improved F model featured a redesigned engine cowling, upgraded DB601 engine variants, and refined aerodynamics that significantly improved performance. Japanese pilots were essentially comparing their newest fighters against a German design already one generation behind current production. The broader strategic context shaped how Japanese military leadership interpreted the test results. Japan's planned offensive into Southeast Asia and the Pacific would bring conflict with British and American air forces. Understanding how Japanese fighters compared to modern Western designs became a matter of national survival. The Bf-109 testing provided a benchmark, however imperfect, for assessing Japanese aviation development. Senior officers drew several critical conclusions from the evaluation program. First, Japanese emphasis on extreme maneuverability had produced fighters that were dangerously vulnerable to modern high-speed combat tactics. The Ki-27's success in China had created false confidence that would prove catastrophic against Western opponents using energy tactics. Second, the controversial Ki-44 represented the correct evolutionary direction for Japanese fighter development, balancing improved speed and firepower with acceptable maneuverability. Third, liquid-cooled engine technology, while problematic to manufacture and maintain, offered performance potential that radial engines struggled to match at high altitudes. The decision to continue developing the Ki-61, despite the Ki-60's rejection, reflected this understanding. The evaluation program's impact extended beyond immediate tactical conclusions. Japanese engineers gained invaluable experience examining German manufacturing techniques, structural design approaches, and systems integration. The Bf-109 featured advanced construction methods including extensive use of flush riveting, sophisticated control systems, and innovative solutions to weight reduction that Japanese designers studied intensively. Perhaps most valuable was the DB601 engine license that came with the Bf-109 purchase. Kawasaki engineers used knowledge gained from examining the German-built engines to refine their Ha-40 production, eventually achieving reliability levels that made the Ki-61 viable for mass production. Over 3,000 Ki-61s would be manufactured, becoming Japan's only mass-produced liquid-cooled engine fighter of the war. The institutional knowledge developed through the Bf-109 evaluation program directly enabled this achievement. Lieutenant Fritz Losigkeit's time in Japan provided unique perspective on both nations' aviation philosophies. His frustration with Japanese insistence on turning combat reflected genuine tactical disagreement rooted in different combat experiences. Luftwaffe pilots had learned through brutal attrition that sustained horizontal maneuvering fights were lethal against Spitfires and Hurricanes that could match or exceed the Bf-109's turning ability. Energy tactics, using speed and altitude advantage to dictate engagement terms, had become survival doctrine. Japanese pilots, conversely, had spent years dominating Chinese airspace against inferior opponents, where superior maneuverability guaranteed victory. They had not yet faced adversaries who would refuse the turning fight and instead use energy tactics to methodically destroy more maneuverable but slower aircraft. Losigkeit attempted to convey these lessons, but cultural and language barriers combined with institutional resistance to outside doctrine limited his impact. After completing his advisory assignment in January 1942, Losigkeit made the dangerous 23,000 nautical mile voyage back to Germany aboard the blockade runner Elsa Essberger, returning to combat on the Eastern Front, where he would eventually achieve 68 aerial victories and earn the Knight's Cross. The 5 Bf-109E7s continued serving Japanese aviation after completing their evaluation program. The aircraft were distributed across multiple air bases to provide advanced training for Japanese pilots transitioning to high-performance fighters. Experiencing the Bf-109's characteristics, particularly its demanding landing gear and higher wing loading, gave pilots valuable preparation for Japan's new generation of faster, heavier fighters. The aircraft also continued participating in comparative testing against other Japanese designs, including the Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa and prototypes of various experimental fighters. These ongoing evaluations helped Japanese designers understand performance trade-offs and make informed decisions about design priorities. By mid-1942, as Japan's war expanded across the Pacific, the Bf-109 test aircraft gradually faded from active use, relegated to static displays and technical training aids. Their contribution to Japanese aviation development had already been realized through the knowledge and institutional learning their evaluation generated. The final Japanese assessment of the Messerschmitt Bf-109E7 reflected measured professional judgment rather than enthusiasm. Japanese Army evaluators concluded that the German fighter represented competent design suitable for European conditions, but unsuitable for Japanese adoption. The aircraft's advantages in speed and diving performance were acknowledged, but considered insufficient to offset disadvantages in maneuverability, landing characteristics, and maintenance complexity. Critically, Japanese evaluators believed their newest fighters, particularly the Ki-44 and the upcoming Ki-61, matched or exceeded the Bf-109E7's capabilities, while better aligning with Japanese tactical doctrine and operational requirements. This conclusion contained both accuracy and dangerous assumption. The Japanese were correct that their latest fighters matched the 1940 vintage Bf-109E7 they had tested. They were dangerously wrong in assuming this meant Japanese aviation development matched the West's cutting edge. By July 1941, Germany was already fielding the superior Bf-109F model, and the revolutionary Bf-109G would begin production in 1942, featuring pressurized cockpits and substantially improved performance. The obsolete test aircraft had provided false confidence about Japanese competitive position in fighter technology. The legacy of Japan's Bf-109 evaluation extended far beyond the immediate test results. The program fundamentally shifted institutional thinking about fighter design priorities, validating the move toward faster, more heavily armed fighters, even at the cost of pure maneuverability. This philosophical evolution, though incomplete and resisted by many traditionalists, represented essential adaptation to modern aerial warfare realities. The practical knowledge gained about liquid-cooled engine technology enabled development of the Ki-61, providing Japanese forces with a fighter capable of competing at high altitudes where radial engine fighters struggled. The evaluation also revealed tactical lessons about energy management and combat doctrine that some Japanese pilots absorbed, though institutional resistance prevented wholesale adoption of German tactical approaches. Most importantly, the program demonstrated Japan's commitment to measuring its aviation technology against international standards rather than remaining isolated in comfortable assumptions of superiority. Today, the story of Japan's Bf-109 evaluation represents a fascinating intersection of technology, culture, and military doctrine. The friction between Lieutenant Losigkeit's energy tactics and Japanese insistence on turning combat symbolizes broader differences in how nations approached aerial warfare based on their unique experiences and strategic requirements. The technical knowledge gained from examining German engineering contributed directly to Japanese fighter development, while the performance comparisons provided essential data for strategic planning. The evaluation program's ultimate conclusion that Japanese fighters matched German capabilities contained both truth and dangerous overconfidence, reflecting the difficulty of assessing rapidly evolving technology through limited testing of already outdated examples. The 5 Bf-109s that arrived at Kobe Port in June 1941 served their purpose not as potential production aircraft, but as measuring sticks against which Japanese aviation could evaluate its progress and identify areas requiring development focus. That contribution, though less dramatic than combat victories, proved essential to Japan's aviation programs in the critical months before the Pacific War began.